Hello and welcome to another lesson with Global News Alliance Academy. I'm your host, Sam Ebersole, Director of Training for GNA, and today we're going to talk about storytelling, and more specifically, journalistic storytelling, with someone who knows his way around a story and a camera, Dr. Tim Wright. Thank you, Tim, for making time to be with us today.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be here.
Dr. Wright has a wide-ranging career as an actor, producer, educator, and after a career as a university professor teaching acting and directing, script and screenwriting, he became a certified instructional designer producing training content for DuPont Sustainable Solutions. He's led train-the-trainer workshops in various locations around the world, and we're excited to have him with us today to talk about a topic that one might not immediately associate with journalism, but in fact, pretty much every form of communication comes back to a foundation of storytelling. So we're going to talk about storytelling, but we're going to talk about stories from a perspective of conveying the reality of what really happened, but doing it in an engaging way. So some stories are made up, others are based on reality, but every good story, whether fiction or fact, should be grounded in truth. Truth about the human condition, truth about our reason and purpose for being, truth about existential questions about the meaning of life, you name it. But Tim, get us started off here, Dr. Wright, with what does it take to be a storyteller when the story is about actual events and things that happened?
Well, storytelling is as old as time. I mean, I think it's woven into our very DNA. I think going back, to even early biblical times, it was the stories about Abraham and the Garden of Eden. What stories do is it takes information, but it gives meaning to the events that happen around us. So we've been telling stories to each other forever. We're continuing to do that. We tell our children stories. And again, one of the wonderful things about stories is it takes events and it doesn't just talk about the events themselves. It weaves it into a format that we create meaning through the types of stories that we tell, the types of stories that we listen to. But there's a craft of storytelling that most people aren't even aware of. It's like language. A lot of times we follow the rules of language, but very few of us can really articulate what those rules are. So I think once we learn the rules of storytelling, we become better storytellers, and we're able to craft stories in a way that they are helpful and that they can uplift and serve as warning stories. You've heard of morality tales from the medieval times. Stories were used as a warning. Don't do this, because if you live this kind of lifestyle, this is what is going to happen. So all that to say that stories are deeply woven into the very fabric of who we are as people.
In those morality tales, if you got it wrong, the dragon ate you, right?
Right. And we continue to see that. There's morality tales that we watch on television all the time. And it serves as a way of showing us this is what the world should look like. One of the reasons I got into media early, I was convinced that media has more power influencing culture than any other form of communication, because media stories, they're going to tell a 13-year-old girl, this is what a relationship looks like. This is what it should look like in our culture. And unfortunately, a lot of the stories being told are weaving lies into those stories and saying this is virtuous. And so again, the power of shaping reality through those types of stories is something that's very important for us to realize. And that applies to news media as well.
Absolutely. So let's look at news just for a second, because our reporters are telling stories about what God is doing in their church, in their community, in their country. So they're kind of locked in by the facts. I mean, the facts dictate what the story is that they're telling. But you're suggesting that they can use storytelling techniques to make those facts more engaging, more relevant, more meaningful for the intended audience.
Heidi Baker, I'm not sure if you know who she is. She's got a saying, stop for the one. And that's a lot of times what storytelling does. You can say 1,000 people were saved at this revival. But if you choose that one, here's Ahab, and he encountered Jesus Christ through a dream. And it affected his entire family. And you tell this story about Ahab and his journey, the obstacles that he had to overcome, the revelations that he had, and it reveals a deeper truth than if you try to just stick with the facts of 1,000 people, because there's 1,000 Ahabs, there's 1,000,000 Ahabs, who have encountered this. But what a story does is it shows us the personal aspect of that and the impact that it has not only on the person, but the ripple effect of how one person can affect change and how one encounter can impact an entire society. So it's those stories that, going back to stopping for the one and focusing on the one, that tells a universal truth that we would never capture just through listing the facts.
So if that's one of the tactics or techniques for effective storytelling, that is identifying a personal story inside of the bigger event, what are some other things that journalistic storytellers can do?
Well, it's a similar type of thing of, you have your main character, but you also have a cast of other characters. Like there was one story I saw that you pointed out in one of your feature stories where one person was impacted by another person's act of kindness, but then that inspired somebody else to join in on that kindness. And so eventually you had a whole community of people that were impacted by that one act of kindness. And so you build a cast of characters, you tell the story in a way that it has a character arc. This is where they started. This is where it ends. This, like any good story, it doesn't happen in a straight line. I had my film professor back at the university said, this is storytelling. Your character's up, your character's down. Your character's up, your character's down. But you're on a stair step. And so eventually you end up, depending on the type of story that you're telling, at a different place than where you started. But the journey there can be filled with obstacles and victories, as well as setbacks, because that's what life is. Like, life happens in a way that we're up, we're down, we're up, we're down. But the good thing about us, we've read the end of the book, so we know how everything works out. My vision of heaven actually is everybody sitting around and watching a movie of everybody's life. It's like, and we cheer from their birth, and we see their story all the way to the grave, and they're the hero, and we just celebrate the goodness of God through the story that their life tells.
You mentioned the word hero. So the hero or the protagonist is the person that in the story that you're rooting for.
Right.
So, it could be a child, it could be an 80-year-old elderly woman, it could be someone who, maybe fits the Hollywood mode of a hero a little bit more, obviously. But like you said, that person's journey has to have setbacks, or there have to be things that prevent them from reaching their goal. Otherwise, why should we care about what happens? Whatever is the thing that is holding them back is the antagonist, right? So that's the person or the force or the, whether it's a government entity or bureaucracy or whatever it is, but it's preventing them from achieving. Might be a physical handicap, might be a weather event. It might be a story about a hurricane survivor or something.
Right. And sometimes those obstacles are external, and sometimes those obstacles are internal. In fact, it's usually both. It's a combination of both. And what the external does, it reveals what's happening on the inside. And that's where we see the transformation in people and in communities where something changes and they rise to the occasion. They transform to overcome those obstacles. It might be a matter of faith. It might be a matter of courage. It may be a matter of resources, you know, uh, both personally and as a community. But we have this external and internal conflict that we overcome. And in news stories, a lot of times it's built around, uh, unfortunately, negative events that happen, something tragedy. But what a good news story is going to do is bring the heart out of what happened and the challenges that people are facing to motivate us as a community to say, how do we respond after watching these stories? And so that's why a good news story is going to not only inform us, but it's going to move us in some way emotionally so that we can respond to say, we can't just sit back and watch this happen, even though it's happened on the other side of the world, because we realize that event, that's our brother, that's our sister, that's our mother and our father and our brother over there. We have to respond. We can't just sit back and say, oh, that's them, and, because that's what news stories do. They inform us for the purpose of helping us to respond appropriately. I just thought of the word responsibility. It gives us the ability to respond appropriately.
I mean, sometimes the emotional connection and the obvious problem that needs to be fixed is evident from the very beginning. I mean, if I had a chance to interview a family whose child was one of the hostages being held over in Gaza right now, for instance, it doesn't take much to set up that problem because everyone can relate to having a loved one, a family member who's in harm's way. And we want that to be solved. We want the solution to be presented. So if the news story is all about that situation and that hostage situation in Gaza, it might really be about the negotiations to try to resolve the hostage situation. But our heart feeling for the parents or feeling for the sibling, the brother or the sister of that person who is a hostage, that's built into the story. That comes with the territory. Other stories, it might be a lot more difficult to identify, to give us a reason why we should care about how this person feels about this situation.
And that's the um, work of a good storyteller. It's like what's really going on beneath the surface. We talk in acting that it's never about the words, the script. It's always about the subtext. What's going on underneath? What's really happening is always below the surface. And that's where we were talking about before about in a good story, the hero's journey, we see people change. And that's always an internal change. It's never the external may change, but the lasting change is going to come from the inside. And that's where good stories will always dig deeper than what appears on the surface. Even though the surface is interesting, the real stories underneath all that.
So I'm thinking of a story that Stan wants me to do next month here in Colorado. There's a convention of computer programmers, not a convention, a meetup of computer programmers. Hackathon is what they actually call it. and they're going to be exploring AI technology for the church. So, a producer might look at that story and say, what's the angle? What's the real story here, right? So artificial intelligence, AI, is plenty controversial, right? So there are stories there. It's just going to be my job as a producer to figure out what they are. So I'll go to the city where this event is happening, and I'll start interviewing people to find out why they're there, what they're trying to do with AI, what their purpose and mission is, over the course of the 3-day event. But if I really want to get to the heart of it, I have to figure out what is it about AI that is potentially dangerous. Is that too strong of a word?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that we might compromise or sacrifice by giving it over to an AI process instead of a fully human process? So maybe you, as a director and screenwriter, have some insight for me on what story I should look for at that hackathon.
I think, you always go towards human emotions. It's like, okay, what are your greatest fears about AI, or what are your greatest hopes? I mean, AI is absolutely amazing. I remember one of the first times I saw AI in use, it was like, this is incredible. And then it was like, this is absolutely terrifying. It was both at the same time, because the potential can be extremely productive and powerful and freeing. But the dark side of that, go back to our Star Wars metaphor, the dark side is that it could be extremely, our greatest nightmares of artificial intelligence taking over and subverting human intelligence and human power, human autonomy. And where is there a tipping point with that? So, and where is wisdom? Not just knowledge. I think there's a real call, a real need. There always has been, but I think especially in the time that we live in, a need for wisdom in holding hands with this incredible amount of knowledge that we've acquired. And I think wonderful things can happen with this technology if it's handled with wisdom. And obviously, this doesn't surprise God. It's not oh no. It's I think he's in the midst of what is. And it's very interesting times to be alive for sure. But I think you'll find some fascinating information at this meetup. I want to see your story when it's done.
See, I've created desire already on the part of the audience by teasing, where we might go with it. And that is kind of part of a story too, right? The foretelling of what's coming, just to give them to anticipate. And anyway, so many aspects to storytelling. Are there any other key ones that we want to address before we wrap up here today?
One of the things that happens in good storytelling too is what's called open loops, where just kind of what you were talking about, rather than resolve the whole thing, there's always unanswered questions for the next story, coming up next, and that keeps us as audience members engaged, but it also is more true to life. There's a lot of open loops, but that's a great storytelling technique to keep people engaged in the process, and not like a book or a movie. They typically wrap everything up unless there's going to be a sequel, of course, and that's where they leave the open loop. Say, oh, there's some unanswered questions here, so that hopefully they'll come with a sequel to see that. But and even in newscasting, I think leaving that open loop of even the question, what's happening here? What is God doing? What is your response going to be to this? What's our community response going to be to this? And asking questions is just as important, if not more so, than providing information in a good story.
Yeah, I mean, the gospel message itself, in one way, it's completely closed because, like you said, we read the end of the book, we know what happens. But it's open-ended enough that there's so many different ways we can get from here to there that we can't know, we won't know until the final chapter has been written.
Anyone who's been a Christian for any times realizes, oh, this is a walk of faith, and along that walk, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of questions, even questions to God. So why would you allow this to happen? And sometimes just bowing to the mystery of I don't know, but I know who I trust, and I'm glad that even my lack of knowledge does not affect my lack of trust. But that's a journey that we walk out in our life throughout our lifetimes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tim. That was a great start. Maybe we'll have to do storytelling part two in the future, because I think there's a whole lot more here that can be tapped. But just to reiterate one point, because we are journalists, we are constrained by the truth, so we can't embellish, we can't take liberty with the truth. But at the same time, within the truth, there is a lot of opportunity for creativity to incorporate the things you're talking about, to incorporate the techniques and the tactics that will engage our viewing audience. And I think that first one that you pointed out may be the most important one, is make it a personal story. Find an individual who is at the center of the story that you're telling, the news story that has to be told. Find a person, make us care about that person by relating them and helping us relate to them, and then showing the challenge that it is for that person to accomplish what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Which brings us back to the dramatic curve and the whole traditional storytelling technique.
Like you were saying, there's so much to storytelling, and I think the more you study it, the more you realize that it's an important part of our lives, an important part of our culture, and an important part of how we create meaning. And so, learning the art form is worth taking that effort to be able to tell good stories, because stories are extremely powerful and shaping our understanding of how the world works and how it should work.
And you kind of said this, but let me reiterate. So, to learn to be a good storyteller, one tactic that we can do is to expose ourselves to good storytelling. So to find masters of storytelling, whether it's in a book, in a TV show, a movie, even in a song perhaps, but we're finding good examples of good storytellers to learn the craft of storytelling. But then, like you said, the 13-year-old girl, find storytellers who are telling ethical stories, right? True stories, telling stories that have a God perspective, because we can find great storytellers who may not be telling stories that are edifying, that are encouraging, that are spiritually uplifting. And we might be able to learn the craft, but we might actually do harm to ourselves in the process by exposing ourselves to those kinds of stories.
Yeah, storytelling is extremely powerful and extremely dangerous, because good storytelling can have me cheering for the wrong side, because I gain empathy toward the antagonist, that maybe it's a mass murderer, and all of a sudden that's my anti-hero and I'm cheering for them to do better, because the way the story is crafted has moved me emotionally to say, oh, it would be good if these two people got together, even though I know morally and spiritually that would be devastating and wrong. So uh, I think finding good storytellers are one of my favorite. It goes back to radio days, but Paul Harvey. If you get a chance to listen to some Paul Harvey stories, they're audios, they're not videos. Master storyteller, and had a way of crafting a story that would pull at your heartstrings and stimulate you uh, intellectually and emotionally.
Paul Harvey was great. And now for the rest of the story, except I can't do it like him. Well, thank you, Tim. And thank you to all of you who are watching and part of our Global News Alliance and our training academy. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to us on YouTube so that you won't miss out on any future content that we'll be posting. And also, be sure to reach out to us if you have any questions. If you'd like more information about being a part of our worldwide effort to tell stories about what God is doing around the world, visit our website, gna.news, and click on Training. Until next time, may God bless you and keep you as we work together to tell the greatest story ever told.